thought it was a chill chapter, and apparently it's a chewy chapter. So, I'm gonna.
It's a bit of both. Yeah, there's some chewiness in spots. It's more of a Raisin Bran cookie, where it's like most of it's soft, chewy cookie, but there's a couple of those just like nuggets of raisin buried in cookie to sink our teeth into.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Chapter 14, a message from the Mahale. And our symbol is the dragon's fang. Because, so many reasons. The Mahale have the power, dark friends. This is the right icon for the chapter. And obviously a message from the Mahale, because we've got Torville, aka Dark Friend, dropping off a message. And that sort of triggers all the events. A mile west of the ridge, the camps began. Men and horses and cook fires, wind-flailed banners, and a few scattered tents clumped by nationality, by house. Each camp a lake of churned mud separated from the others by stretches of brushy heath. Men mounted and afoot watched Rand's streaming banners pass and peered towards other camps to gauge reactions. When the Aiel had been present, these men had made a single huge camp, driven together by one of the few things they truly shared in common. They were not Aiel, and feared them however much they denied it. The world would die unless he succeeded, but he had no illusions that they shared any loyalty to him, or even believed that the fate of the world could not be made to accommodate their own concerns, their own desires for gold, or glory, or power. A handful did, perhaps, a bare handful, but for the most part they followed because they feared him far more than they did the Aiel. Maybe more than they did the Dark One, in whom some did not really believe, not in the depths of their hearts. Not that he could and would touch the world harder than he had already. Rand stood before their faces, and they believed in that. He accepted it now. He had too many battles ahead of him to waste effort on one he could not win. So long as they followed and obeyed, it had to be enough.
There's a lot to unpack there.
There's a lot to unpack there, mostly when the Aiel had been present. So I was thinking about the history. Rand ditched the Aiel and went and dealt with the rebellion, got stabbed by Padan Fain, carried back nearly dead, put in his bed. The Aiel were worried that he was going to die. Then he was healed and immediately vanished, took over Ilion, started a war, and then attacks the Shan-Chan and has a whole war with the Shan-Chan before he comes back to the Aiel.
Yeah.
Like, he snuck out in the middle of the night to fight a war.
And then fights like 2.5 wars and comes back almost dead again. And significantly worse for wear all around.
And so that's when the Aiel beat his ass.
Yeah, and it's the maidens specifically. It's not even all the Aiel. It's only the maidens that feel like it's that egregious of an offense. But yeah, you can kind of see where they would feel a little bit like their feathers were ruffled because they're the most badass dedicated fighters, literally the dedicated. And he just ignores them like a china vase he has to keep safe on a shelf. It's so frustrating for them to deal with that.
Frustrating for me. It's like,
I know.
Man, like,
yeah, you're protecting the people who are the most proper for being your army. Like, don't protect them, use them.
We're also seeing a lot of paranoia here from Rand, right? He's got people from 3 different countries and he's using them against each other to make sure that they don't rebel. And it's like, instead of trusting anybody, he's making sure that nobody... And that's something we saw him do, like, all the way back in Cairhien, which is send, like, nobles to Andor that were his enemies and split them up. Like, this is a balancing of his enemies is something that Moraine taught him to do.
Right.
And Tom helped him with. But he continues to do it here, even in a battle situation. Which I'm like, isn't that the right way? I mean, you want everybody to work together, but... Having
the Aiel in the mix would have helped so much with the cohesion between the armies. And he still could have had an edge of that's who will guard the guards, right? Is the other guards, right? You make all of the foxes guard each other. It's a good strategy if you have someone like the Aiel who you can actually trust, but to be friendless and the only person holding that together is both strategically and emotionally unsound.
And it mirrors the Dragon's Peace, right? He brings together all the nations, sets them against each other, and forgets about the Aiel when they're really the key aspect that makes the whole thing work. They're the police. They're the in-between. So he keeps making this mistake over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, and we'll see if that works or not in the Fourth Age. And then there's this concept just that we've seen him having before, that like the world will die unless he succeeds, but nobody else is playing for that team. Him just thinking about it's their own concerns, their own desires. Like that's the only thing that's actually happening. And that is, just really speaks to how we are learning the global community currently thinks behavior works.
Yeah, we talk about the Wheel of Time and how every time I reread it, I really do find something new in it because my life has changed. Not that the books have changed, that my life has changed. And this always seemed ridiculous to me. I'm like, really? It's the end of the world? Why is I was so annoyed by these nobles. Like, unite behind him, do what he says, let's pull together and solve the frickin' end of the world. Robert Jordan, I can't believe you think people are this bad. And now that I've gotten older, and I've seen the pandemic, and I've seen climate change, and we have existential crises coming, and the amount of selfishness I've seen, and the number of people who just ignore it, I'm just like, oh, Jordan, once again, has proven understood people much better than I gave him credit for, and much better than I ever will. So
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's frightening.
The nobles and the politicians. He's frighteningly accurate.
It's really, so you start looking at politics being like, all right, which of you was an actual dark friend and which of you was just a normal petty person? Which of you was actually a Forsaken in disguise? Because, yeah. RJ was our prophet. That's what we're going to have. This will be our foundation of our religion and our cult that we put together after the apocalypse, because obviously we're just going to we're going to do it Dies the Fire, but we're going to do it with Wheel of Time instead of Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it'll be fine. It's going to be cool. We're going to be a cool cult. We're just going to chill out, have some goats, grow weed. It'll be chill.
Two Rivers to Bach.
Yeah.
We'll definitely make it a strain called Two Rivers to Bach.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It'll be great. The 14 books is way better than 3 books if you're talking about building a world. So
15 even.
Yeah.
So what we have here is sort of a meeting of like the mini Black Tower. I don't know. It's like Rand's personal recruits are all together. And we also get, Torval, who shows up from the Black Tower.
Who is the message from the Mahale.
Who is the message? He is the messenger.
In so many ways, he's the messenger, and he is the message in so many ways. Because this is you're getting the sense that there are 2 towers, that there is what Taim is building, and there are the Ashaman that Rand ostensibly is trying to trust. Wouldn't really call them people he trusts, but he's trying, and we should give him credit for that.
And don't forget, Torvel, Dark Friend alert, first of all.
Yep.
Definitely Dark Friend. Anyone from the Mahale is going to be a Dark Friend. He's also the guy that got his skull cracked open, and Tam was like, hey, if he lives till the morning, you can heal him.
Oh, that's who that guy was. Yeah.
That's who that guy was Torvel. Yeah.
And he gets killed in Farmatting, right?
Fane daggers him, and he goes all crumbly.
He's the one that tries to run to the end of. He's the one that tries to run away, and you actually see what it's like to be stabbed.
And gets like 3 steps and dies. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
He's the one who goes black mold and dies. Yep. We have Dahmer Flynn, who we know he's one of the good guys. He's a healer, saved Rand's life. That's why he healed him from the dagger stab.
And there's a servant who gets named in 2 different chapters and means absolutely nothing. There's nothing interesting about Brienne Caravan.
Nope.
She just gets mentioned twice. Well, she gets mentioned twice a couple times in this chapter, and then in one other chapter. She has a name. She's got a backstory, but absolutely nothing interesting about her at all.
At some point, she gets left behind somewhere.
That's in the next chapter that we see her in, which is like 3 or 4 chapters from now. We'll see her again, and then that will be the end of it. Bye-bye.
So, and the important thing is the Ashaman with Rand he's raised them to Ashaman. He's not really gone through the official channels, but he's given them the dragon pins.
And Torval is
not happy about that. Yeah. The Mahale controls that.
I just gestured at the camera in a way that I did not make good audio content.
I'm nodding.
Yes. Anyway, that's the important part. Because I remember back before I was like, none of them except the bad guys have the pins. And this is the conversation that's like, yeah, as of now, nobody who gets the pins is a good guy. But before this point, these guys that Rand raised personally, they have been given the pins, and they end up going, well, either dying or going to Logain or staying with Aes Sedai.
And Logain ends up being an Ashman just because I don't think Taim can, like, legitimately not just give him the pins.
Exactly.
He's too good of a channeler.
Right. Yeah. He's Logain. You have to. Like, it's just, it's the Logain thing. He's He's the good false dragon.
One thing I noticed about Torval, he has a glittering red gem capping the hilt of his sword. And I'm like, dagger.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh. It's funny, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but yeah, the fact that he's killed with a dagger and he sort of has a ruby-hilted sword, I'm sure it's a coincidence, but it was funny.
That is cool. Yeah, just we had another mention of the Moradin ghostliness in Rand's head. If Lews Therin had been real, a flash of color just beyond the edge of sight, the feel of someone about to touch him from behind. It's just right there again.
Oh, huh. Again, I think the flash of color is the Taviran-ness and his connection with Matt and Rand. I don't think that's... But the way he connects them together with the someone about to touch him from behind.
And he's not thinking about Matt or Perrin. He's not thinking about either of them in this moment. He's just thinking about Lews Therin. So...
The Swirl of Colors is tough.
Lews Therin returns at the end of the chapter. So it's like...
Yes.
You know, he's coming back, so to speak. But there's also the touch from behind that we talked about as being Moradin's thing, and I'm very cognizant of that now because my mind has been blown on that topic. So, you know, I was just like, there's the touching from behind. It's another Moradin feeling. Blah! So paranoia and that intensity. Also, but there's some Moradin. And Rand, I think, is adjusting slightly, and that's why Lews Therin is coming back. It's because Rand has chilled a little bit from the last chapter, even though it's pretty much the chapters run straight into each other. But I think he's adjusting slightly, and that's what lets Lews Therin come back, so to speak. Yeah,
there's something at the end of the chapter that I think influences Lews Therin. I'll talk about it when we get there.
Okay. I like that he has his tent set up as a Aiel tent, kinda. Because he only has the table in it. He doesn't have any furniture. It's just layered rugs.
Oh, for sure. Nice.
Like, it's just rugs.
He's gotten used to that.
Yeah. So he has a little bit of Aiel culture. Tiny bit.
Yeah. So Torval is studying Rand's maps. I assume that's just spying for Taim, getting as much information as he can. Also, by the way, Rand just gives away the fact that he's going to cleanse the source here to Torval, and therefore to, I assume, all to Taim and to the Dark One. Like, not a smooth move.
No.
The whole thinking out loud.
Not a smooth operator.
Mm-hmm. So the message from the Mahale is basically asking about the Aes Sedai coming from Saladar, and what are we doing with those? And a good chunk of this book is Egwene taking control of the rebel Aes Sedai and then setting up the traveling to the tower.
Right. The whole we're going to rest for 1 month and then we're going to vanish situation. Yeah. I also like... To return to the physical message, Rand cracks the magnificent seal to bits between his fingers.
Yeah.
Just
he doesn't just break
like
it.
That line. He's just, crumbling the seal. I mean, he's literally the seal breaker. Well, he gives it to Egwene, but he has to break the seals. And he takes Taim's seal and then just exerts that energy on it. It makes me happy.
Well, he doesn't like Taim's arrogance. Taim has created a dragon seal that looks like it could be from the Dragon Reborn. Taim does that a lot. He's like, he makes himself seem like the Dragon Reborn. He's like, I'm standing in for the Dragon Reborn. But I mean, he claimed to be the dragon, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's what happened. That's what he was before. So he really hasn't changed his mind about that.
No. And yet another person turned to the shadow for jealousy of LTT / Rand.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just tale as old as time.
In fairness, I think he turned to the shadow before he really knew who Rand was.
True. But to declare himself dragon probably wasn't because he actually thought he was supposed to save the world. He probably did it for selfish reasons and turned to the shadow around that quest for power. So it checks out.
And you got Tashiva backing up Torville because Tashiva is like, yes, I also want Rand to be fighting the Aes Sedai. Like, they want to start a war between the Asha'man and the Aes Sedai. Like, that's great for the Dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just a bunch of drama. Narishma is like,
it is
looking at Rand like he senses deep currents. Like, this is a very, very tense moment scene wise. Just looking at all the things that are happening, it gets very, very tense and very, very like the music is at a fever pitch, kind of like. And then the tension is broken by a parade of charcuterie board, which is fun.
There is, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting little interaction here because, like, Rand is really angry at Torville, and I think Narishma's worried that Rand's about to lose it. And then when Rand, like, puts the dragon scepter down and smooths the letter back out, and, like, he relaxes a little bit, and then Narishma relaxes, and, like, the tension sort of drains out of the room. There is a moment, I think, where Rand's about to do some serious violence.
Mm-hmm.
So we get the letter, no honorific. I have the honor to report that 29 Asha'man, 97 dedicated, and 322 soldiers are now enrolled at the Black Tower. There have been a handful of deserters, unfortunately, whose names have been stricken, but losses in training remain acceptable. I now have as many as 50 recruiting parties in the field at any given time, with the result that 3 or 4 men are added to the rolls almost every day. In a few months, the Black Tower will equal the White, as I said it would. In a year, Tarvalin will tremble at our numbers. I harvested that blackberry bush myself, a small bush and thorny, but a surprising number of berries for the size. Mazrim Taim, Mahale.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. So the blackberry bush that he harvests, he traveled to Tarvalin and literally recruited from the city itself, is what I read from that.
I never thought it was the tower. I thought it was Emmons Field. I never considered.
But he says I harvested
the tower.
That blackberry bush. What? Right? What is that blackberry bush? I harvested, and what you go is in the paragraph above. He's talking about in a year Tarvalin will tremble at our numbers. I harvested that blackberry bush myself.
I can't disagree with you, but I never read it that way. I always thought that this was about the Two Rivers.
Rand Grimace put That's a good question because it does seem that like
he figured like the old blood is strong there. Mm-hmm. So there's probably going to be more people who can channel. I mean, he already saw the Two Rivers girls being taken and Alana and Varen being like, oh my goodness, look at all of these girls who can channel. Like he had that experience. He's probably assuming that there's an equal number of boys that can be taught. But it means sacrificing the children and the young adults of his home. Well, all the people who test true from his home. That's always been how I've read this section.
But like, where does Taim reference the Two Rivers?
He doesn't.
Like,
right? He doesn't. There's no. I always thought that it was sort of a red herring of a comment. I never thought that it. I never thought anything came from it. I mean, they do have I think they have a couple of recruits from the Two Rivers in Sanderson's books, I think.
No, they've got a ton, yeah. And they do mention that there's a bunch of, like, Two Rivers has a lot of very talented channelers. But I think that's later, right? I think that hasn't happened yet.
Well, I mean, in the timeline, they would need to be recruited around now in order to be semi-competent Asha'man by the time that the last battle happens.
Does anyone remember the name of one of the Asha'man from the Two Rivers?
These are all Sanderson names, so no, I don't. Come through, chat. Jonathan Dowtry. Thank you, Jedi Pants. He reaches full rank of Asha'man.
Sorry, just doing a bit of research here.
Okay, so he hangs out with Logain and helps with all of that plot. Yeah. He's one of the, like, extras, basically, in that plot in the Black Tower with Andril and Logain and Damarin. And that whole sequence, Jonathan is in those scenes. Oh, and he's named for a fan of the Wheel of Time, Jonathan Ham. That's cool. James Torfin. James Torfin only interacts with that plot once.
Yeah, all these names don't appear until Sanderson, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so I think Sanderson at least shares my headcanon about what that means, because that confirms what I think. So he's got to agree with me about that. And I agree with Super Sky. Like, there are no named Tarvalin Asha'man anywhere. That's not a thing that ever gets mentioned.
Yeah.
Whereas Emmons Fielders distinctly are, even if it is only a Sandersonism.
Let me just do a quick search in...
It's one of those things that I never thought we would even disagree on. So funny.
Right?
It's so funny.
Yeah, sorry about that. Path of Daggers.
No, this is what we get paid the big bucks for.
Just trying to figure this stuff out.
Extremely big Patreon bucks.
I'm going back to Crown of Swords and seeing if there's any reference to Two Rivers as a blackberry bush or something like that.
I also feel like the Two Rivers could be described as thorny, because there'd be a lot of resistance to that recruitment, and he would have had to like go through a lot of that. Two Rivers stubbornness, and another way to describe that would be thorny.
And that's always something that like Nynaeve is described as the blackberry bush whenever she's unfolding. Like, and Nynaeve is very Two Rivers.
Yeah, so confusion. And they're going to be a thorn in the White Tower's side. Kind of like the Dark One. Also the Dark One. Definitely a thorn to his foot and a bramble to his hand. Could describe the Ashaman collectively, as well as Manetherin's people.
Yeah, I'm not finding any reference. So anyway, I think that's enough searching on that.
Well then, I guess that is a headcanon how you want. I'm firmly going to stay on my hill of that's a reference to the Two Rivers. You can do what you want. You're allowed to be wrong on this one. It's fine.
Yeah, the whole world paid. I can't find any evidence one way or the other. I've got my headcanon, but I can't find anything that's proving to me.
So yeah, if you, dear listener, have any comment on how this headcanon works for you, what your headcanon is, how you interpret this, or you have any evidence or cool links to supplemental reading about this, you know where to find us at What Spoilers on all of our social media.
Yeah, I mean, in a year, Tarvalin will tremble at our numbers. I harvested that blackberry bush myself. Like, I know it's a different paragraph, but like, what is that referring to?
Referring to a conversation, referring to the prior conversation where Rand said, I want you to personally deal with that if that happened. That I assumed it was referring to a prior conversation that we just didn't see on screen.
We just don't have any evidence for that.
Yeah, that was just how I interpreted it. I never had a doubt in my mind what he meant.
All right, well, moving on. We'll see if we can... I'll keep that in mind in the future if we can find a reference to Two Rivers. Hold on, let me do one more search and then I'm done.
That's why he's grimacing. It's what had to be done. He does disapprove of recruiting in Emmons Field, but there's no option. The world needs Ashaman, and he can't show preference.
Yeah.
Because that points it up. So, having Taim be the one who does it makes it just a little bit more covert and a little more on the down low, rather than whatever mess some random Ashaman would make of it.
You're arguing me around to your side. It's the way the sentence is structured feels like Tarvalin, but the evidence seems to point towards Emmons Field. So, I'm gonna keep an eye out because I don't have one opinion on that. All right, moving on.
The Ashaman are not aimed at the tower.
The way he thinks about the Ashaman is pretty tough. One, they're not aimed at the tower, yes, but because also like Aes Sedai are much more advanced skill-wise, right? I've created Big Boom, but Aes Sedai can like deprogram the bomb. They can cut the right wires. They understand how to shield, and he's worried that going up against them, that even though I think we see later that's not the case, there's enough skill and power in the Black Tower that the Aes Sedai are incompetent enough that the Black Tower does just fine up against them. But he is worried that like in an all-out war it would just leave everybody fucked, and that's not what he's going for.
Right, and he's right to be cautious about that. The fact that he's wrong, there's no way he could have known how wrong he was, right? Like, it's ridiculous how incompetent the Aes Sedai are. He gives them so much credit that they don't deserve, actually. But it's a really safe bet, so...
Yeah. It would be one thing to see. I mean, we see sort of when the Red Sisters attack the Black Tower and get bonded, how incompetent, how, like, they just get dominated very quickly. So, and that makes it feel like the Black Tower really is much more advanced than the White Tower at that point. Although I have to wonder if there was an actual battle, if the sisters wouldn't do better, if they were like, had their circles ready and were ready to attack.
That's totally fair too, because the Red Sisters assume that the men like don't know how to channel or don't know how to channel effectively, not that they had a competent teacher and that they have actually honed their skills. The assumption of their incompetence is what leads to their capture, not an actual matching of their skills. The closest we get to a matching of their skills is when Andrel and Pavara have their fight, but that's a complete Sandersonism, and we don't really know how RJ would have handled that if he had chosen to write a scene like that at all.
Not to mention Andrel is no power.
Right, but it's still, that's the only time that we see What a Nice Sedai who's actually using her skills rather than being, like, because she walks up to that situation assuming that there's going to be a fight. But that it's such a Sanderson thing, and yeah, he's not a powerful channeler, so it's just, we never get the matchup that we deserve on Ashaman versus Aes Sedai. So Rand is making a very safe bet by assuming that he would have his ass handed to him in a straight ahead conflict, because I think they probably would, because yeah, like you said, they know how to defuse the bomb.
And also Rand's thinking of them wrong, right? This is the whole, it was a convenient belief, however. An Ashaman only needed to know how to kill. If there were enough to do that at the right place and time, if they lived long enough to, that was all they had been created for, which is a completely contrast to his Ashaman are men, and they need to figure out how to be men again, right? Like, right now, they are just ticking time bombs that are going to go mad.
Yeah, but he is pointed in the wrong direction. He's only at Steel right now. We know he advances all the way to Quendiar.
Right.
So he's pointed in the wrong direction. Yeah, he's trying to drive them all into this pit with him, and he tries very hard to save that at the last minute with one pithy line.
So they're drinking. I love the little comment. Dashiva is like scowling at his wine because he's used to Age of Legends really fancy wine, and all the he's like, as if the fanciest wine was swill, and it's like, yeah, compared to Age of Legends wine, it pretty much is.
It doesn't matter which one you pick; it's all fucking trash.
No, it's all trash. And we've heard Rand think that, right? We've heard him be like, ugh, I miss the vineyards of my youth. You know, because he remembers LTT's memories. So I like that sort of consistent, like, wine is really bad. Like, they don't know how to ferment wine. Because they don't have, like, temperature controls and, like, yeast strains, and I don't know.
They definitely have yeast strains. They absolutely have yeast strains. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. The temperature and humidity controls, the ability to perfectly monitor every aspect of it, to regulate how the things are grown down to the tiniest detail. I mean...
Oh my god, having Ogier and Aiel singing your vines.
Oh my god.
You would get just the best grapes
right?
for the best wine. I can see, yep, no, totally. That's, the growing process has so much to do with how the grapes are. And yeah, I can see that sung wine is what I'm going to call it from now on.
Yes.
Like sung wood.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But again, just another clue for Dashiva being Arengar.
Osengar.
Yes, Dashiva being Osengar, a.k.a.
Balthamel, right?
Well, no. Agenor.
Agenor becomes...
He's...
Arengar.
Agenor's the nerdy scientist who's Osengar. No, Arengar is Balthamel, who's the lecher, right? Who's Halima.
Oh, okay. I'm working on it. I'm working on memorizing how this all fucking goes together. Jesus.
It's three of them. Each one has three identities that you have to memorize. And Osengar and Arengar is the hardest freaking... Yeah.
This is the male-bodied of them, which is Osengar.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Focus. All right. 19 deserters and weird fruit on the trader's tree with heads. It's very graphic.
Very graphic. That the fruit is the heads of the dead men, that the tree grows the fruit of traitors. That's their heads. Yeah.
I don't like it.
And then the skeleton, I assume they just rot away and leave the skeletons.
Well, maybe they, behead them and bring the heads back and only hang the heads. That was how I kind of imagined it.
Yes.
It's and I guess the rest just gets thrown into the pit. I don't know.
Well, I assume that's just like they kill them wherever they are and just bring the head back to Peru, because like the traitors run away, right. So these are basically runaways, handled a little more harshly than the White Tower handles runaways.
Just a little smidge.
But I mean, essentially, you're giving people nuclear bombs. You can't run away with a nuclear bomb. Sorry.
Yeah, it's
and
a little bit of a one-way street. Like once you commit, there's no turning back now, and that's harsh, but it's real.
Because we know no one can stop, and then these men will all eventually go mad. Mm-hmm. And you can't turn someone who's powerful, touching the source, and mad on the world. That's just not ethical.
Right. Taim's a great one for naming things, but men needed the trappings, the symbols and the names, the black coats and the pins to help hold them together until it was time to die. So fucking emo and dramatic and true all at the same time.
I've been watching Narishma in this. I think Narishma is very worried about going insane. I think he's starting to go a little nuts. Mm-hmm. And his response is he's very concerned with how many losses there are in training. And then he's very interested in the cup of wine. Mm-hmm. And also he's very, very interested when Rand talks about cleansing the source. So I think Narishma is struggling with some insanity here. I don't know what form his insanity takes. I don't know if we have a reference.
I don't think he gets included later in the descriptions, but yeah. When does he die? He dies violently, right? Not from going insane.
I didn't think so.
Or does he live?
No, he lives. Narishma is the one who will follow after.
Oh, is that what that means?
And he goes and gets Kalendor.
And that's why he lives.
I mean, we don't have proof that he lives because he's last in Towers of Midnight going into the last battle. We don't see him after the last battle or during the battle, but with the assumption is he's alive.
Huh. Good for him.
Yeah, I have some theories about him coming up, so let's get to those. Whatever else, Torvel stood into that threat too, the threat of insanity, 1 in 50 mad. I don't know. I think maybe he's sworn to the Dark One. I think he's got some protection from it. Do you think that's like why a lot of these Ashaman who go black, do you think that's what Taim is promising them? Protection from the Taint?
I mean, hell of a recruiting tool.
Right?
Hell of a recruiting tool.
Even I would have a hard time being like, ooh.
Like if you want to back out, but you don't want to die, that would be your way, you know? Mm-hmm. It makes total sense. It would be not hard for the Dark One to offer that. That's a very low effort thing for the Dark One to offer. Like, in order for them to sow more chaos, you don't taint them yet. Like, it's fine. Mm-hmm. And they'll end up being dedicated to you in other ways by the time that they would need to be, taken by the taint anyhow. So, yeah.
Isn't that a plot of a Bond movie? I will infect everyone with this disease, and I have the antidote or the cure, and so I will control the cure.
That sounds like a Bond plot.
Yeah, I feel like that's basically like the Dark One is a Bond villain, right? Like, I'm going to infect all channelers with the taint.
I mean, that is the V for Vendetta backstory, So, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel like the Dark One is totally using that to control all the power users, which is great. I mean, that's why he did it in the first place.
Yeah, totally. So, Rand thinks about how Narishma is slightly older than he is at one point. And then Brienne takes advantage of Narishma's preoccupation to make sure his silver mug held more hot water than spiced wine. Because he looks really young, and it's like he has been through as much shit in his own way as Rand. I mean, obviously not exactly, but they're all men of needing a drink status, and yet he looks so young that the maid is like, oh no, you need to have watered wine. It's wild. These little details of just how incongruous the power they wield is to their outward appearance. They're all little babies, but they're also hardened war veterans, at the same time.
And this takes me back to Jordan in Vietnam. And then if you go back and watch some of those videos that were taken at the time, I mean, any soldiers, any time right now, being 40, looking back and seeing 18-year-old, 17-year-old, 20-year-olds, the people in charge are 22, 23, and they're babies. They're babies.
Yeah.
But they're hardened soldiers.
I remember reading about how because of prior wars, Vietnam had the youngest average age of new recruits or something like that. That was a factoid that's bouncing around in my head. Very, very young war on the whole. Just a very young soldier force. And that's really harsh. So yeah, you're right. That it shows here in how Jordan writes about the Ashaman. So many of the ones that get a lot of screen time being so young and so powerful and so destined for absolute failure. Ultimately, I mean, death,
And Jordan being a machine gunman, like, I think of him as having that sort of power, and the people around him having that sort of power. It's done through machines instead of the one power, but the ability to shred your enemies to pieces wherever you see them is essentially what a machine gun is, you know?
Right.
So, yeah, like, I've said this many times, but I see, like, Do Mice Wells and a lot of that influence of the use of the one power, especially among these young men, as something that Jordan saw literally in these sort of environments. And it hits hard.
Yeah. There's even a reference to Jim Wells here. So, yeah.
Yes.
It hits hard and it hits solidly. First, the wine discussion.
Oh, okay.
This is where we learn about the wine. And we get the comment, kinder than gentling, even if we knew how. Kinder than leaving you insane and cut off, which is, like, not the worst argument, even though it's coming from a dark friend and it's really problematic. It's like, yeah, I mean, that is kinder than the other. Yeah, this is where we learn about that. This is that actual mention of the wine. And then we've got Rand having this whole internal reaction to seeing pity on the face of the servant, this woman who only shows up twice in this book, and then that's the end of it. She is now the person who's looking at him feeling pity, which I feel like is a stand-in for the reader. I really feel like you're reading this and you're feeling really pitying of Rand, and like suddenly he looks at you and it's very fourth wall breaking and he's just like, don't pity me. And it's like, whoa. But like, it's amazing. POV writing. RJ just...
Well, the fact that he sees pity as weakening as much as fear does. That like his fear, someone else's pity weakens him. Like, that is such a weird way to approach it. And, like, it shows this, like, I can never be weak. I mean, you talk about toxic masculinity, right? The idea that I can never be weak. I can't let anyone see me be weak because then I will be pitied and that will make me weak.
Yeah, and it makes you not human. It takes away your humanity, your ability to receive, like, the pity and the love of others is like a really important part of his revelations, the ability to receive that and to be himself anyway, and to carry the pain and to laugh, like laughter and tears, right? That's a critical part of his revelation. And right here, you just see him doing everything the wrong way and being like, only half of the equation. I can't have both. Otherwise I will break and I need to drag everyone else down with me. Like, it's so toxic. It's so toxic and harmful.
And the opposite of what he does after he comes down from Veins of Gold, where he trusts people and uses good leadership and good decisions. And it's a little too late. Little too late sometimes, but...
Right, but that is the revelation.
Because he does so much of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. So yeah, Dashiva is the only person who's not disturbed by the comment about the wine, for obvious reasons.
He's not going insane.
Right. Narishma's worried about his wine. Hopwell's like staring through the tent. Dashiva's just curious about everything because he's a Forsaken. And then, Fedwin Moore bursting in with news about the Shanchan.
Into the painfully stretched silence burst a husky, wind-blown young man in black with the sword and dragon on his collar. Of an age with Hopwell, still not old enough to marry most places, Fedwin Moore wore intensity more closely than his shirt. He moved on his toes, and his eyes had the look of a hunting cat that knew itself hunted in turn. He had been different once, not so long ago. The Shanchan will move from Ebu Dar, he said as he saluted. They mean to come against Ilion next. So that's the almost bigger news than the message from the Mahale, because that sets up the war between Rand and the Shanchan going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this sets up the geography of the conflict that will happen very distinctly.
Oh, so I assume you will want to talk about that a little bit.
A little bit. Tiny bit. Dashiva laughs because chaos. I think that's why Dashiva laughs. Chaos.
I mean, I wonder if he knows that Semirog sent the Shanchan.
Don't know. He's not in the little trio, but...
Yeah. It's hard to know how much he knows as a Forsaken, because he seems to be kind of like in low esteem and no one shares anything with him. And most of the Forsaken don't know he's alive.
Right. Exactly. They didn't even know he died. So I guess maybe they assume he's alive because they didn't know about him dying the first time. I don't know. So yeah, they're putting soldiers along the Venir Mountains all the way to Aron Head. And then there's a section on the next page that says the coast between Ilion and Ebu Dar stared up at him, rimmed for most of its length by hills and mountains dotted with fishing villages and small towns. So this is all about where the mountains are and where the roads are. And it's one of those things that, like, I've always glossed over until doing a post-geography degree podcast read-through. I'm not usually a maps and places type person. I'm just like, brain, figure it out. But really trying to put this together, this is using the terrain. This is the Shan Chan looking at the terrain and going, okay, well, there's the choke points. We're going to attack the choke points. And by attacking the choke points, they're letting everyone know what their plan is, because that's where they're putting in their fortifications. That's where they're putting people, because this is not a broad open, you can go there any way you want kind of situation. There are very specific passes. And if you can hold the pass, you're holding back the entire army kind of situations, except for trade rather than for like empire lines.
And on the coast, this is located on the southern coast, right? Because Ebu Dar and Ilion are basically next to each other on the southern coast of the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just like looking at the map at the front of the book because, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the bottom, there's like two little dangly bits on the coast. One of those, the dangly bit that's more west is Ebu Dar, and then the one that's more east is Ilion. Mm-hmm. My question is, why aren't the Shan Chan coming at Ilion by sea?
Because it's super, super deep. There's a discussion about only a mile out.
That's true, yeah. The bay between Ebu Dar and Ilion is called the Cabal Deep.
Just a mile or so from shore, it gets so deep that their deepest sounding lines can't find the bottom. That is a hell of a continental drop-off. And so for people who don't know, the way that waves work is basically circles. There's these circles of energy that, like, the water molecules themselves only travel in a circle, but that's how the energy propagates through the water. And out in the open ocean, those cycles are like a couple of meters generally. Like, that's kind of the average wave. And then obviously storm waves get absolutely ridiculous. But the amount that it goes from peak to trough, that is a circle. There's a circle being traced by the water in more or less in place. It is staying in place in the context of that circle. And so when it's out in the open ocean, you can have an actual circle. But when you get closer to the coast, that starts to become an oval. You having more drag at the bottom than at the top. And so it starts to flatten out into an oval. And then eventually you get it stretched so hard that there's like a breaker, and you get the whole, like, everything that happens in the surf zone. And the water's moving and sloshing around.
Well, that oval, does it stretch vertically or horizontally?
The oval stretches horizontally. So it's dragging at the bottom and then going farther over at the top. And eventually that's why the wave curves the way it goes up and breaks the way it does, right? Because it's stretching out sideways.
Gotcha.
So that is all to set up another very important explanation, which is about coastal wave heights. So if you've ever looked at the waves on the east coast of the United States versus the waves on the west coast of the United States, you will notice that the ones on the east coast are generally very small. They are on a normal day, sunny weather, people are hanging out. The waves are quite small on the east coast. Whereas if you go out here to the west coast, they are noticeably larger. Like, even on a normal day, people will go, like, surfing. We have much bigger waves, and I should be giving numbers with this. Waves out here are like 6 feet on the west coast, say. Whereas on the east coast, they'd be maybe 2 feet. So huge difference. And if you look at like Google Earth or any map of the world that shows like the basic bathymetry of the ocean, you'll notice that there is a lot of pale blue continent shaped stuff happening off the east coast and virtually none happening off of the west coast. On the west coast, it just becomes dark blue, like very quickly off of the edge. And that's the continental shelf. And it's because the North America is crashing into the Pacific plate and making a trench and dragging behind it the East Coast. The East Coast is a passive margin that is eroding faster than it is accreting. And so you have a much longer, like 100-mile, it's about 100 miles of the continental shelf, whereas out here we have about 12 miles of continental shelf until the continental shelf. And the continental shelf is where that circle starts to get interrupted. So on the East Coast, there's 100 miles of that circle being drug out into longer and longer ovals, into ovals, and losing a lot of energy doing that. Whereas here on the West Coast, they only 12 miles offshore, they are having their full circle, and then they hit that continental shelf, and they still have a lot of energy when they come crashing in on Oregon and Washington shores and California shores.
And then reduce that even more because it's a mile offshore, not even with us, it's like 12.
Yeah. So all of that is to say that when they say the deepest sounding lines don't hit the bottom a mile off of shore, those are some massive waves that are being created. So that is why the Shanshan are not attacking over sea. It's because they would have to cross that massive bar, basically, where those waves suddenly are forced into existence out of nowhere.
Yeah, you kind of have to swim out past the breakers and watch the world die.
So that is why they are choosing the overland route. We can go back to the book now.
Sweet. That was great.
So Rand is mad that Fedwin Moore knows all these things, but it's just common knowledge. It's not secret military strategy. It's just everyone knows it. Normal stuff.
And Fedwin Moore does the clever thing and counts the wagons, right? We see that a lot. Count the food, count the supplies. That's how you know how many soldiers are there. Don't count the soldiers because they're always going to, they can be deceptive or hiding or something like that. So the wagons, the supplies tell you where things are going. And I feel like that's something we've learned from, who's the little dry secretary that rubs his hands?
Balwer.
I feel like Balwer sort of uses that information all the time as well to track people and track the White Cloaks and stuff like that. Or just all the assistants, all the little assistants and spies that end up helping out all of our various main characters. Who are the two that help out Elaine in the Andoran Palace?
Mistress Harfor and Nori.
Yes.
There's also Alviarin having a spy that learns about how big the Black Tower is and tells Elida, oh yeah, Tovanne and all of her sisters are screwed because we have an eyes and ears who counted the wagons going in and out, and from that we calculated the population.
I think she's lying about that, though. I think she just got it because she's black, and it came, through the black.
I think she was intercepting information from an eyes and ears. So I think it was a true observation, even though everything about her is suspect. But regardless, it comes up over and over again that count the wagons, count the food. Mm-hmm. That is how you're going to actually get a better idea of what you're dealing with than what your eyes can see of the army itself. Right. That's the take-home message.
So Torval's response is, hey, let's mount up, right? Let's go attack to stop them from coming. And Rand's response is basically, I doubt an army with Damane is destroyed as easily as one kills Aiel committed to an attack and caught by surprise. So there's your reference to Dumai's Wells. Mm-hmm. It's basically being I know you guys tore the Aiel apart, but there's channelers on the other side and they are an army and you guys are not equipped to deal with them.
At all. Don't be an idiot. Or do, because you're a dark friend who's trying to sow chaos and kill off important tools for the light. Your choice.
And so all this leads up to just a devastating war between the two of them. I mean, I feel like a theme of this book is fog of war, right? If the last book was all about consent, this book is about acting without information.
Yeah, I dig that.
There's just so much going on where our characters either just don't know what's going on or, especially when Rand is in the forest and they're all again, I go back to the Vietnam, attacking an army in a forest where you can't see anything, right? Man, I more and more feel like Jordan was basically setting up the Black Tower and the Ashaman to go fight in Vietnam. And he wanted to write about that experience. And that's what this book is about. And a lot of that is misdirection and fog of war and not knowing what's going on and just killing your allies. So much of that going on. So
I am nodding.
And this whole idea that a sharp rap might send them back to Abu Dar, right? We'll just in and out, no problem. It's we'll just go in there, dominate, get out.
It's fine. It's fine.
The lie of politicians over the ages is that a quick war, just a quick war, just a very quick war. Promise. Yeah.
In and out, 5 minutes, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get a report about the quote-unquote Aes Sedai weapon, so we know that rumors of the gateway exploding, that was Elaine caused, right? And so that's been spreading around through the Shan-Chan, and then that got back to Rand through spying on the Shan-Chan.
Yeah, and that's the reason Saidin is worse there has nothing to do with her explosion of the gateway. It's that the Bowl of the Winds was used like 150 yards away.
Right, yeah. And I remember there being a lot of debates back online back in the day is like, wait, what caused the weirdness? Was it the Bowl of the Winds or was it the exploding gateway? Because they both happened essentially simultaneously in the same place. And so I think it actually took like Jordan responding before we knew for sure whether it was caused by the Bowl of the Winds or the explosion. And what convinced me is that it happens, it's more intense along those big rope-like, they sent off these rope-like weather control vanes that went off into the distance, and people saw them, like there were these giant ropes of power in the sky. And that is also like the weirdness radiates out along those ropes of power.
Yeah, very much so. And the gateway had no reason to warp Saidin, whereas the Bowl absolutely did. The Bowl managed to pull in Saidin despite not having male channelers in the circle. So Saidin definitely had to manifest some real presence in that moment. And then Dashiva's like, it's not possible. And Rand's like, why are you saying that? And it's like, because he's a dark friend who thinks he knows things.
Right.
Sorry, a Forsaken. He's a Forsaken who thinks he knows things.
It's like, I know what's possible because I'm from the Age of Legends and I know, it's like, no, you don't know what's possible. We've been proving that over and over again over 3,000 years. It's been a whole slew of discoveries.
Yeah, totally.
And then this one, he promises Mor that you'll be with me to the last battle. Mor does not make it to the last battle.
Rand kills him.
Mor drinks a cup of wine.
Rand gives him the wine and holds him while he dies.
Mm-hmm.
It's just... it's so sad.
It's so sad, and especially because he trusts Mor, right? He leaves Mor to protect him, his like love of his life, and he's like, he finally trusts Mor, and in the act of trust, Mor dies.
Yeah, it's pretty painful. Yeah, so Mor is dead, doomed. He's doomed.
So Rand's thinking about the Taint. 1 in 50 mad already, more to come.
He's thinking about the wine. And more at the same time, in the same paragraph. It's just, it foreshadows it so hard that he's learning about the wine and promising this kid he's going to be there to the last battle when it's like, the wine is how this kid will not make it to the last battle. Jordan, why?
Really well done. But yeah, Hopwell's stares took on new meaning, and even Narishima's habitual quiet. Madness did not always mean screaming about spiders, And so he's worried about madness. And this brings us into a discussion about the Taint and the cleansing of the Taint. This is the only time we get a hint about what he asks the Finn when he went through the gateway back in the Shadow Rising. We have been waiting for 4 books to find out what some of those questions are, right? So here he says... He had asked once warily, where he knew the answers would be true, how to cleanse the Taint from Saidin. So, that gives us one of his questions to the Finn. Right? We know one of them is how to kill the Dark One, which he later says is the wrong question. And then the other one is how to survive the last battle. So, survive the last battle, how to cleanse the Taint, how to kill the Dark One were his 3 questions. And in this case, we don't really get the answer. He got a riddle for an answer. Herod Fell had claimed the riddle stated sound principles in both high philosophy and natural philosophy, but he had not seen any way to apply it to the problem at hand. So I assume there's some riddle about the 2 opposing things must attract and cancel and they will be destroyed. Something of that nature that gives us a hint to the Taint and Shadar Logoth canceling each other out and destroying each other and being attracted to each other. Right? So I think that's the hint he must have gotten. We never find out what that riddle is, which is sad. I would have loved to have seen what that riddle was that the Finn gave.
Yeah. It would have been clever and awesome, and yeah, that would have been cool.
Had Herod Fell been killed because he might have puzzled out the riddle? I don't think so. I think we go back to my theory that he was killed because Samael thought he was Asmodean.
Yeah, I'm sold on that one. So what is the hint? I've always wondered what the hint is.
Rand had a hint at the answer, or thought he might, a guess that could be disastrously wrong. I think that is a new thing that's happened to him, right? So he's got a hint. He's always had the riddle, and he hadn't seen any way to apply it. But just recently, he got a hint. And what is that hint? Well, we've talked about how the opposing beating of the taint on his wound, right? He's got the slash, and then he's got the stab wound from the staff, right? And one is tainted with the Dark One, and one is tainted with Shadow Logith. And he notices that they, one, prevent the other, they attack each other and keep him from dying, and two, they beat in opposite tandem. And so I think that's where the hint comes from that lets him put together that, oh, what I need to do is take the taint of Shadow Logith and it will cancel and attract the taint of the Dark One.
Right. I've always wondered
so the
about
hint is
that,
the slash.
But you're right. That makes perfect sense. Syncopation is the key to everything.
And in real time, he got slashed a couple of days ago, right? This is a brand new thing to him. He got slashed, healed, 2 days later, woke up, attacked Ilion, and now he's, a couple of days into ruling Ilion?
That's wild to think of how fast these things happen. I need a graphic. I need to just print a graphic out and tape it on every wall of my office until I memorize it.
Well, don't forget the last book took place over 10 days, start to finish.
Well, depending on the location.
Right. And it ended with him taking over Ilion, and here we opened up with him going out to a group of rebels, right? Just a couple of days later to negotiate.
Yeah. God, this timeline is wild.
I will say, looking at the timelines, it looks like most of the rest of the books take place over about the course of a month. There's obviously overlap between a couple of those books, but from start to finish, there's about a month for each book that we get for the rest of the series.
Only a month. Rand is a month from the last battle right now?
No, for each book.
Oh, for each book. Okay. So he's 6 months?
This probably like 9, 10, 11, 12... 13, 5, 6 months, yeah.
Wow.
And there's some overlap there. So even though like 9 and 10 take place over a month each, there's like 2 weeks of overlap. So it's only about a month and a half for those 2 books.
Yeah. I need to print out a big graphic on my wall.
There was actually recently on Reddit, someone took some graph paper and did a little highlighting, and it was really good. Like, I was impressed. Like, it showed, I wonder if I can find that again. Hold on. I'm going to do some research.
Ooh. Yes.
Each square is 25 days.
Yes.
And I was saying it follows a logarithmic decay almost, right? Less and less time per. And no gaps in between, right? There's a big gap between The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn, and another gap between The Shadow Rising and Fires of Heaven. But then you start to get all sorts of overlap.
Yeah, huge amounts of overlap in that latter part.
Right, especially the last 3, book 12 and 13, Towers of Midnight and The Gathering Storm have a lot of overlap going on, which makes sense because he's just trying to tell, like, again, those were all supposed to be one book.
Right.
Telling different character stories.
And look at Winter's Heart. Winter's Heart only takes place during timelines covered by the prior and following books.
Right, yeah.
That's why Winter's Heart is so draggy feeling.
Yeah. You could literally cut it out and, like, it's literally just scenes that you could put into the other 2 books.
Because sighting being cleansed is such a big deal. Which, to bring us back to this book, is the idea that Rand just, accidentally voices out loud, which is just like, oh my God, like symbol crash, record scratch, pin drop, Rand.
The Shiva looked poleaxed. I love that. Him just like, we're gonna cleanse, like, yep. And then it goes right back to the Dark One. Absolutely.
It's a huge deal for the Dark One to lose that foothold on everyone's reality, you know?
But it also, when then the one power is cleansed, it gives, Logain and that group is like, oh yeah, Rand did it, right? Like, he was planning on it. Like, they should know that it was him at that point.
Yeah.
And I think they're the only ones who do, honestly. Everybody else doesn't believe that it happens, but the Ashaman know that it's cleansed.
And even Torval's into it. You notice that Torval says that would be wondrous. Which does, I think, support the notion that he may have joined the dark side to escape the taint. And he would turn back now if there was that option. And he gets more seduced by Taint fairly quickly. He's a bad person, but I think this supports the idea that Taint is using that protection as an inducement to be part of the shadow side.
Rand issues a bunch of commands, basically preparing to fight the Shanchan now that they're moving in, is my assumption. Mm-hmm. Some orders for Taim, and then Narishma was last. And thinking of Aes Sedai and Shanchan and weapons, Rand sent him away as well, with careful instructions that made the young man's mouth tighten. Speak to no one, Rand finished softly, gripping Narishma's arm hard, and don't fail me, not by a hair.
Yep, that's Kalendor.
He's thinking about using Kalendor for the cleansing, right?
I was wondering what the timing about that was about. Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So he's thinking about the cleansing. He's going, what am I going to use? I'm going to use Kalendor. And because he basically goes nuts when he tries to use Kalendor with lightning, right? And later we get from Codswain that that's a flaw in Kalendor. And at that moment he goes, oh, that means I can't use Kalendor. I'll have to use the other option. And the other option is the Choten Call. Gotcha.
That's the order of that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's a good thing that he waited as long as he did to get that information. I think that the Kalendor would have been the wrong instrument for that task.
So also, he sent Narishma to get Kalendor. Narishma comes back and says, you didn't tell me about all the traps that were on there. And Rand's like, yeah, I did. I totally did. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of options there. Mm-hmm. Either somebody snuck in and set more traps around it, which I don't think happened.
Agreed.
But it's possible. Or Lewis Theron set some traps that Rand didn't know about, right? His madness set traps. Or he didn't tell Narishma about anything simply because he doesn't trust him enough.
He subconsciously gave him incomplete instructions.
Yeah. But I'm curious what you think about that. Like, why didn't Narishma, like, what happened where Narishma, did Rand unconsciously set more traps that he was unaware of? Or did he subconsciously undercut Narishma? Like, that's a good question.
And we should, potentially throw Narishma under the bus. Could he have forgotten? Could part of his madness include fucking it up somehow? I have always headcanoned that it was probably LTT setting a couple of extra traps, aka Rand's paranoia sort of subconsciously setting some traps because he actually doesn't trust anybody. And maybe if he actually trusted someone, then he would tell them. But he probably doesn't actually trust anybody, and he certainly doesn't trust Narishma subconsciously, and so his paranoia won't let him give all the instructions. But I think that the mechanism for that is that LTT wove some extra traps into it. I think I think both things are true at the same time.
Right.
And I've never quite, like, it could be Narishma. I don't think it's Narishma. I think it's Rand.
I do too. I also think it's the return of LTT returns because he does lie to Narishma and he feels guilty about that. So here's what I think happens. He can't trust Narishma, sends him after the sword, doesn't tell him about all the traps because he doesn't trust him, feels guilty about that, and that guilt then becomes a manifestation of LTT again, and that's why LTT returns.
I was trying to put together what LTT coming back meant, and I dig that. Because I really do believe that LTT is a manifestation of Rand's madness, and so we have to figure out what is triggering him to dissociate to that degree versus integrate with that. Which one is good or bad, I don't know, but like what triggers that and what motivates that. And yeah, having his paranoia ping basically by noticing that he's giving out that flawed information is enough to, and I don't think this is strategic at all. I think this is very subconscious stuff that's happening for him. This is absolutely not, it's horrible strategy madness. Because he's insane and traumatized. All of that's happening at the same time.
But I think it comes down to lack of trust, right? Like that's really like his madness is his inability to trust anybody, especially the Ashaman. And when he reintegrates, he comes down and he can trust. And the fact that he doesn't trust Narishma and doesn't give him the keys, right?
Yeah.
Narishma's like, you almost killed me. Like you really did.
Yeah, and it's a terrible strategy because then the traps would have been blown. Probably because they would have been partially dismantled when they tripped Narishma up and he either, rolled a critical hit or fail. It's then the sword would have been unprotected probably, and anyone could have picked it up. He could have flattened the entire Stone of Tyr. There's so many things that could have gone wrong if Narishma hadn't been a clever, trustworthy person who was talented with the power. Narishma really saves Rand's bacon here, because having the sword be in the middle of the traps exploding in a way that like was booby-trapped by his own paranoia, like that can't have ended well, you know? Mm-mm. So I think Narishma was very clever and got through a serious James Bond sort of moment, unlocking that. But yeah, I do agree that that's why LTT comes back, is because he's like, oh, right, you need me again to push off all this guilt that you're feeling about what you just did to someone who you should trust, but you can't trust, and you feel guilty, even though you're also setting them up to be killed because you're an asshole. Like, yes, I'm here to help. I love the picture we get of Rand at the end of this chapter, though, where they all come back in, shouldering their way aside, the lot of them eager to tell Rand that the men in the trees had decided wisely after all. They found him laughing till tears rolled down his face. Lews Therin had come back, or else he really was mad already. Either way, it was reason to laugh. Oh, this is that angsty, gnarly Darth Rand energy that we love.
Also, the insanity. He's just in the corner rocking and laughing and crying. Like, he's completely nuts. He's completely insane. Nuts. This is where Jordan was like, how insane can I write Rand? And people are still going to tell me that he's just fine, that he's not having any problems, right? This is him going like balls to the wall, making Rand act as nuts as he possibly. Like, literally people finding him like laughing and crying in a corner and rocking. After the voice in his head comes back. Oh, thank God the voice in my head is back. I was worried and lonely without it, right? How nuts is that?
Yeah. It's Rand's spiraling hard now. Jordan's just setting us loose, and it's insane. We're insane. Anything else you have to say on that chapter?
That was a fun one. I like being in Rand's head. You know, like when I say Rand is one of my favorite characters, it's because of scenes like this, like really getting in his head and parsing all the different stuff and all the insanity and all the little plans that he has. And like, he's such a complex character that being in his head is so fun. Like, it's just fun. I can live there forever. And it's one of the reasons that when I was first reading the books, I would often get frustrated with other characters who weren't Rand, because I just wanted to get back to him and see how his madness was progressing. That's why, like, in the next chapter, when it's like back to Egwene, I'm like, oh no, Egwene, you know, I want to be in Rand's head.
Yeah.
And now going back, I love these Egwene chapters. They're some of the best Egwene chapters as she manipulates the hall.
Sure, yeah.
Like that. They're super fun. They're super fun.
But she is guilty of not being Rand. That is a real thing.
But she's guilty of not being Rand. Yeah. No. And so these chapters take me back. They take me back to, like, they're like childhood delight. This is really what I used to love when I was a kid, is this sort of like going mad in Rand's head. His great. And then compare and contrast this sort of POV to Eye of the World Rand, Book Rand, Farmer Rand. Like, the difference is so well written.
Yeah, fuzzy sweater Rand.
Mm-hmm. And the transition between the two is so smooth and so flawless that it never feels like he walks into a room and comes out a different character. You know, it's like, oh yeah, this is the same Rand. And then you go back and like, no, it's not. It's really not. Yeah,
it's a creeping change. It's intense how much all of them change, but Rand especially, because you start out Eye of the World. All the Eye of the World isms are through Rand's POV. All of that initial world building is through Rand's POV. And yeah, now he is a different kind of seminal character. He is actually fully transitioned into this terrifying nihilistic monster that is very likely to destroy the world if given half a chance. It's amazing.
with access to Choden Call and Kalendor, and like the world's sitting there, on the back of the bus going, I'm in danger, like this.
Rand is diseased and wounded and breaking, and he's just careening towards the edge on fire and dead-eyed. It's wild.
About to wage a war of attrition with Shan-Chan.
Yeah, that both sides will retreat from, thinking that they lost.
Both sides did lose.
Rand does so much damage to his own side that he makes it a lose-lose draw. It's rough.
Again, Vietnam.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that war is... I'm glad that there's not too many chapters on that war, because it's really rough.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't know if I want to do this now, but the whole taint as an analogy for the AIDS crisis of the 80s. I sort of had this thought. I was still talking about it a little bit offline. It's a little out of context here, but it was just sort of a thought of like how dominant the AIDS crisis was in the late 80s, early 90s when these books were being written. Mm-hmm. And how good of an analogy that works for the One Power and the taint of the One Power. There's
a quote in the chapter that perfectly goes with that.
But the idea that it hits a subset of men, it kills randomly and horrifyingly, and that like it's a matter of time until everybody's going to be affected by this.
I found it. Early days yet, and no way till the day you died to know you had beaten the odds. Except that the odds would beat you one way or another in the end.
Yeah.
Like that reminds me of reading plays set in New York in like 93 about gay men dealing with AIDS. I mean, Rent, The
AIDS pandemic. Like,
yeah.
I listened to Dan Savage talk about like his friends and people he knew just dropping dead around him left and right. Like it was,
yeah.
And it was a horrifying disease. It didn't kill you quickly or anything. Like you suffered and wasted away. And some of the descriptions of rotting away with the One Power remind me a lot of the sort of side effects of having AIDS.
Yeah, and being socially ostracized, being pushed out, being shunned, mm-hmm. being vilified and given not even the tiniest bit of care.
Being viewed as evil, yep.
Having your humanity absolutely be ripped away by your diagnosis. Like, I mean, that you don't even have to change the prose. He's writing stuff about that. Yeah. Like I've read multiple plays, watched multiple movies with a critical analysis. Like I recognize the language there. You're very right. How many gay men did Jordan know who were taken out by the AIDS crisis? How many family members? How many military family members? Like it feels like it hit home for him early on before it was cool mm-hmm. to care about it at a policy level.
Well, and these books, this book was probably written in 90, 95, 96. I mean, that's quite a bit after the 80s AIDS crisis. I mean, there's a certain amount of knowledge.
Right. But the thoughts were formulating in the years prior. Like, this is him being able to look back and be like, that's what fucking happened. And it sucked.
Right. So I'm impressed at how many different analogies you can make the One Power out to be, from drug use to AIDS analogy to,
Yeah, no, I mean, the ability to channel the way that there's like a coming out with that, with Rand and Matt, where it feels like a gay coming out story. And then you have this disease that is the inevitable outcome of going gay, which is so the messaging of the late 80s, early 90s, like around that. And just even into the late 90s when I was growing up, like this idea that needed to be debunked, that it's not being gay that causes AIDS. And like that rhetoric you see echoes of that in how channeling in men is treated in these books, especially in how the boys react to the information in the first place.
Yeah, they're sort of discussed in the way it makes Matt a little less of a desirable character to be like, oh, my buddy is, if you make the gay AIDS analogy, it's like, wow, you really just told your friend to go fuck himself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really clear when you reread these books after being exposed to the literature of the gay movement in general, but the AIDS crisis in particular. It's like, oh, Jordan lived part of this. Otherwise, he wouldn't be writing this stuff more or less contemporaneously to it. He's writing this book in 98 about events that happened in 88, probably, right? Like, it's only 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I'd have to go back, honestly, and I don't know the exact timeline in which AIDS sort of exploded onto the scene, but I do know it was a mystery in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. And then it was a policy thing that didn't really catch on until the mid-90s, as I understand it. Like, there was some serious head in the sand bullshit for a very long time, and then in the 90s somewhere that turned around.
Fuck. Reagan and Nixon both did some really horrible things to the population, so...
Yeah. It got better in some respects, but it is kind of funny to bring it back to RJ writing about social things. Channeling women, aka lesbians, are fine. Lesbians are fine. It's just gay men that are scary. Yeah. That's so 90s.
Well, there's no disease that's spreading between gay lesbians.
Even though it totally was. But not to the same degree. Because why would we study that? Why would we care about having any nuance or understanding of how this moves through the population or how it affects people in all kinds of different ways? Like, why would we study that? Why would we collect data on that? Why would we give a shit? Let's just shove it all under the rug and set it on fire.
And that's the thing, like, Wheel of Time is so damn political. Like, that's all people they're like, get your politics out of my Wheel of Time. I'm like,
that's going to be a tough one.
That's going to be tough because it's written in there. It's just in a lot of detail.
If you are allowed to study history and read literature that makes uncomfortable feelings come up, if you're allowed to be exposed to those concepts, the Wheel of Time becomes a very political story. Otherwise, it's a random straight-ahead fantasy novel with interesting themes that have no need to make sense. Like, this is why you need a spread of STEAM, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. You need exposure to all of it, and censoring shit is clearly not what the Brown Aja endorses. Clearly.
Listen, it's just not logical.
See?
According to the light.
The Greens will set you on fire. I have their word for it.
How you been? How's everything going?
I'm good. I'm just actually getting things done. I've been, self-medicating from the pharmacy aisle at the store, vitamin D3 and 5-HTP. And I've been doing that for over a month now, and it's really, really helping and getting that ball rolling on like doing the chores and doing the exercise. Also, I did a whole month of being actually good for an exercise challenge. Very small steps. So I don't know. The world's going to shit into the middle of winter, and I'm doing really good. So, no complaints here. My wood stove is still just the best. I just encourage everyone who lives in an area where biomass burning is logical and power outages are common. Get a wood stove. Get a high efficiency wood stove. It is such a fancy piece of engineering. You want to talk about a jet engine? It is so well engineered, but we produce very, very little smoke, and we get a ton of mileage out of the wood we put into it. And I'm still learning to drive it because I've only had it for a couple months. This is my first year with it, and it's just, oh my God, it's so nice. And then when the power goes out, the heat doesn't go out, and our ability to cook and have hot water doesn't go out, My parents had a wood stove. They would get a cord of wood delivered, and man, I mean, it's efficient. It's like... And it produces a lot of heat. What they would do is they'd always have a cast iron, how do you say this, humidifier on top of it? Yeah, so it's basically kettle. A cast iron. Yeah. The kettle that you put, and you are always boiling off steam because the wood stove creates so much heat that it dries the air out. Yeah, I have stopped using our electric dryer. I just have a rack that I put stuff. I use the dryer to like finish things off, like, oh, we need the sheets before we go to bed, please, kind of thing. But I basically don't use the dryer now because I just have a rack that I put next to the wood stove, and then the air in that room stays a bit. It's not quite as good as the humidifier pot because it's not as constant, but it definitely helps. I can definitely tell, like, I have towels going out there right now. It's going to be a good humidity day in there. But yeah, I need to get one of those kettles, and I also need to get, there's these cool little fans that electric current gets created when it hits a certain temperature because of a piezoelectric property of the material. Sure, yeah. And so then when the stove gets to a certain heat, it starts a fan blowing, and that moves the air, in your house just off of its own power. I need to get one of those as well. So, still got to trick out my extremely expensive wood stove. The wood stove in the hearth is cost a lot of money. It's very extra. But is absolutely paying for itself because the stones heat up and thus are radiating heat back all night. So you come out in the morning and there's just this, it's still warm and dry in the living room when we come out in the morning. Even though the stove is technically cold, the hearth is technically a few degrees warmer than it probably would be if it hadn't been hot all night. Like, it's too hot to touch right next to the stove, you know? Like, it's hot.
Oh, absolutely.
We put huge river stones there for a reason.
My first dog used to stick its nose underneath the cast iron stove while it was hot. And I couldn't get close to it. And she would lay there and just soak up the heat. I was like, how are you not literally burning? I don't understand why you're not. But anytime the stove would be on, the cast iron stove, she would just crawl up right next to it and just literally put her nose underneath it. I don't get it. But,
yeah,
you know, it's like when dogs just love the sun. They just love the heat sometimes.
Yeah, no, there's a few things as contented as a cat rolling around on the stones right in front of a cast iron stove in the winter while it's pouring rain outside. Like, that was, my mom had cats in a stove, and it's just, there's nothing more contented than a cat at full stretch while it is ragingly stormy outside, because there's just this incinerator in the middle of the house just radiating life. It's the best.
And I know wood is, I mean, technically you're burning something, but wood is about as good a fuel as you get because you can just regrow trees and capture that carbon again.
Right. Well, I mean, then you're putting it into like circulation, but you're purifying the air while it goes through its 40 to 60 year, life cycle for, a basic tree. And it's cheap. Our power bill immediately dropped, like, especially because I'm not using the dryer, but just because we're not using the heater, and it's way more satisfying. It's a way more satisfying heat, and I get a bunch of exercise. Well, we both get a bunch of exercise, moving it around. I'm the main fire tender, but definitely I'm not good at chopping it. So I just do the kindling part, the part where you have to break the rounds apart. I tend to leave to people who are taller and better with using leverage.
Leverage.
I'm I'll just stack everything in perfect puzzle pieces and all that.
My latest obsession, heat pump dryers.
Tell me more.
Well, okay, so the difference between heat pumps and resistive heating, right? So resistive heating is basically when you take coils and you put electricity through them and they get hot. Most dryers, that's what they use. But we have these things called heat pumps, right? That basically, use refrigeration. That's what it is. It's a refrigeration unit, and it uses the refrigeration cycle to pump heat from one side to the other. Well, when they're in fridges, they cool things down. When they're in a heat pump, they can heat things up, right? And so you just switch whatever end is being put into the house. And actually, you can use the same hardware. So most modern
of course
AC units that you have outside are heat pumps. And if you reverse them, you can actually pump heat into the house. The cool thing about that is it's about 5 times as efficient as just taking the electricity and converting it directly to heat. Right, you can be it depends a little bit more on the temperature gradient to inside and outside, right? But you can be much, much more efficient with a heat pump. Well, what are the two biggest sources of electricity use? Heating your house and dryers. And dryers have been completely stuck in this resistive heating paradigm. And really, as we're switching to heat pumps for, all sorts of reasons, having a heat pump dryer can really cut down on your overall utility bill.
That makes a lot of sense.
They're just not being manufactured very well. And you also have to have somewhere to pump the heat. So you need some, either connect it into some way to get outside, but you always need to vent outside with a dryer. So,
yeah. Well, that's very cool. Sounds like less of a fire hazard, too.
Yeah. It feels, it's just if we're switching to electric, right? Because, it's things like they just found out that natural gas, having gas pipelines, leak way more than we thought they did. Because
my shocked Pikachu face.
Gaskets and seals. Right, yeah, no, it's shocking that even having it off, a lot of gas is leaking into your house. And it's actually A, not healthy, and B, you're releasing a lot of methane. So New York just outlawed gas in kitchens entirely.
Wow.
And as we switch to an all-electric grid that is that hopefully we can switch to alternative sources, we need to figure out how to use that electricity more efficiently and how to power all the things that we're doing with gas. And gas dryers have been a thing for a long time, right? You can buy gas dryers all up and down the coast. So switching those to heat pumps seems to be a really efficient way to save energy.
Nice.
I don't know how many are actually being manufactured right now. Is my own, I don't think they're easy to buy. Is the problem?
Well, that sounds like a good job for the invisible hand of the market. Somebody.
Oh, what? We need regulations.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah.
To subsidize that kind of thing.
For sure.
Yeah. No, the only issue with heat pumps is when it's really, really cold outside, and especially in like the Northeast where it gets to like -40, or in the Midwest, stuff like that. You do need to like have some resistive heating just to get them hot enough. Like there's a point where the heat pump doesn't work anymore. There's no heat to pump into the house. There's just no heat in the air.
Would be a problem. Yeah.
Or not enough to be efficient anymore. At that point, it is more efficient to just literally generate the heat with the... Well, the other thing about the heat pump is like it's using that energy and it generates heat too, just from resistance. So.
And I'm assuming that there's all the, same issues with refrigeration as there are with like the same issues with refrigeration as with heat pumps for like, you said it's the same unit basically. So it's just the same thing turned around. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. You can even use the same unit. You just need a few different valves in it so you can switch the flow.
That's really cool. That makes so much sense as being a more efficient option, even if it's not perfect. Like, that's pretty cool. Because, I mean, yeah, dryers just feel very inefficient to me. It's the whole, if it makes a fire hazard, is there any inefficiency we could be looking at?
Well, and it's just so much energy. Like, it's a shocking percentage of household energy use goes into drying clothes. Because you're taking water through the phase change. You're taking it from a liquid to a gas. That's the goal. And that's literally the most energy intensive fucking thing we can do with our power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's like hot water, except it actually makes the leap into gas, not just being hot.
Yeah, the phase change, I mean, from physics, like, phase changes take so much more energy than just raising the temperature.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like, I didn't know that until I went to college, but, I figured it out eventually.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's why you can put water on the stove, and it'll get to boiling pretty quick, but then to boil off all that water takes hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's at 212 the entire time. You're just dumping energy into phase change.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, sorry, that's a whole tangent I went off on. Do you want to get into this book?
Well, I went on a big tangent first, and,
That's fair.
So,
I ran with it.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we talked about the chapter. We did a lot of bullshitting at the beginning, and we went off on a analogy tangent at the end. I think that was a great episode. I am ready to wrap it up. That was a blast.
Yes, thank you so much. This was fun.
Super happy to be back talking about the book series where I think we shine. It's amazing. Talking about the show stressed me out. Talking about the book series calms me down. So I'm very happy to be back in my wheelhouse doing this audio content and back talking to you guys in your ears. So I missed this a lot, and I'm really happy to be back.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This is always a pleasure. And follow us and like us and stuff. It's good for us. It's good for you.
And see you next week for Egwene.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?